Hi everyone, it's time to learn macroeconomics again. Today we are going to learn tax policy. For this part, we are going to learn the wealth effect of tax cut, and then the substitution effects of tax rate change, and then the intertemporal substitution effect of tax rate change. For these topics, you need to read textbook chapter 13. First, we start from the wealth effect of tax cut. So consider the situation when government decides to decrease its tax. So if government decreases the tax amount now, it looks like that government is returning cash to households. But does it really create wealth effect? That's the question that we are going to answer for this part. Remember, government has a budget constraint. Therefore, we really have to see how government finance such kind of a tax cut in order to understand whether there is a wealth effect. So for the first scenario, suppose government decided to finance the tax cut through a decrease of transfer payment. Then it would mean that government actually decreased the amount of money that is used to keep household and take it back. In this case, such a tax cut is offset by the decrease of transfer payment. Therefore, there is no wealth effect on household at all. The other possible way that government finances such a tax cut is that government decides to borrow money from households, which means that government issue bonds. So if government issue bonds, then government actually give households some government bond and take some money away from household. But whether the holding of government bond can consider a creation of wealth for household, then we have to recall what we learned from the past regarding the government debt burden from the past. Whenever government issue a bond, for example, $100 million to households, then it creates a debt burden for government of $100 million immediately on day one. Then we know that such kind of debt burden government always has to pay back sometime in the future. If government carry the burden for one more day to day 2, then the burden will increase by 1 plus I times more. It will be 100 million times 1 plus I now. Then on day 2, if government decide to clear the burden, then government would have to tax household the amount of money equivalent to that debt burden, which is 100 million times 1 plus I. So if government take away that money, then the debt burden will be clear, but household lose that piles of cash. And of course, government can decide not to take away such money from household on day 2. Instead, government decides to hold the burden for one more day to day 3. Then the debt burden would grow further to 100 million times 1 plus I to the power 2. So on day 3, if government decides to clear the burden, then government would have to take away 100 million times 1 plus I to the power 2 from the households. So from here we know that whenever government postpones clearing debt burden for one more day, then the debt burden will increase further, which increase the tax amount for future. So now we want to look at how it affects households' wealth if a government decides to finance the initial tax cut by issuing government bond. If government issue 100 million government bond in order to finance a decrease of 100 million tax on day 1, then of course day 1 income will increase by 100 million immediately. However, then government have to tax in the future. Suppose government decide to tax in the future on day 2, then remember such kind of taxation amount should be equivalent to the debt burden that government bear, which would be 100 million times 1 plus I on day 2. Therefore, I2 would decrease by 100 million times 1 plus I. Then its impact on present discounted value, which would be divided by 1 plus I further, would be equivalent to 100 million now. This would offset the 100 million increase on I1 totally. Therefore, there will be no change on the present discounted value of household wealth. The other scenario that we see before is that government decrease tax by 100 million, issue government bonds, then hold the bond for 2 more periods, and decide to clear the debt on day 3. For such kind of a scenario, day 1 income I1 will increase by 100 million. However, day 3 income would decrease by 100 million times 1 plus I to the power 2, which would be discounted back to today by dividing the amount of 1 plus I to the power 2. Then it will be equivalent to a present value of wealth dropped by 100 million, which would offset exactly the 100 million income increase on day 1. Therefore, there will be no change on the present discounted value of household wealth. So what we have here is that whenever government finance tax cut through debt, then it does not create any wealth effect either. So now we look at the other possibility that government finance such kind of a tax cut. Government actually can finance the tax cut by decreasing its purchase. In this case, we know that there's no need for government to take any money back from the household later or now. Therefore, in this case, tax cut financed by a smaller government purchase indeed creates a positive wealth effect on household. So, in such a case, government decrease the tax, give the cash back to household, but there's no need for government to take it back. So that's where the wealth effect comes from. Only if government finances it through decreasing in the government purchase. In summary, what we have so far is that tax cut without government purchase cut actually does not create a wealth effect. And whenever there is a government purchase cut, there will always be a positive wealth effect. So what really matters for wealth effect to exist or not for fiscal policy is mainly the question of whether government indeed decrease its purchase or not. Now we are ready to learn the substitution effect of tax. First, we consider the substitution between today's leisure and today's consumption. Remember substitution effect. Substitution here refers to the trade-off between two contemporary decisions. So we now look at today's leisure versus today's consumption. The logic flows like this way. If household decrease today's leisure, then household can work more, then it will give household more wage money to consume. Therefore, household can always substitute today's leisure with today's consumption, which means that household can increase today's leisure by decrease today's consumption or decrease today's leisure by increasing today's consumption. So there is some trade-off. This is the substitution relationship between these two options. And to be more detailed, if household decrease leisure by 1 unit, then the household can work for 1 unit more. And we know that given the wage rate is W over P, then the household can consume W over P more unit of basket. Okay? Therefore, we know that in conclusion, decreasing 1 unit of leisure will give household W over P more units of consumption. And if we put labor and consumption on the same seesaw, then which means that 1 unit of labor is equivalent to W over P unit of consumption. So W over P represents the value of 1 unit of labor today. Now we want to consider if government decides to tax household. Here we consider 2 kinds of tax. The first one is consumption tax. And here we assume that there is a tax rate, tau C, on each unit of consumption, which means that suppose the price of consumption basket used to be P dollars, now the household has to pay tau C times P dollars more, which means the basket price will increase to 1 plus tau C times P, Therefore, the trade-off between today's labor and today's consumption is not going to be W over P. It will be W over 1 plus tau CO times P. And another tax that can affect this trade-off is labor income tax. Suppose the tax rate on labor income is tau L. Then it would imply that for household, the received wage rate would change from W to 1 minus tau L times W. It would be less. Therefore, for each unit of labor the household supply, the consumption basket he can get will not be W divided by that 1 plus tau CP, will be 1 minus tau LW divided by 1 plus tau C times P. So as you can see that these two types of tax can affect the trade-off between labor and consumption today. So the thing on the right side represents the after-tax value of 1 unit of labor today. Now we consider the scenario that government either increase labor income tax rate or government decides to increase consumption tax rate. For both cases, it would decrease the value, the after-tax value of a unit of labor. So this value would decrease because now the value of your unit of today's labor decreased. It would decrease the incentive for the household to work today. Therefore, the household will work less today, which means the household would decide to take more leisure time now and consume less today. In other words, the household will prefer to substitute today's consumption with today's leisure more. This is called the substitution effects of such tax rate change. If you draw on the graph, then we learn that for higher labor income tax rate and or higher consumption tax rate, it would create substitution effect that will decreases today's labor supply. Therefore, equilibrium real wage rate will increase and the equilibrium employment would decrease. And with the decrease of labor employment, it would lower the marginal productivity of capital, which would decrease the capital demand and decrease the real rental price in equilibrium. As to consumption today, remember, if tax rate is higher, then consumer would decide to substitute away today's consumption with today's leisure. So today's consumption will decrease. Now we move on to discuss the intertemporal substitution effect of tax. There are several intertemporal trade-offs that we need to discuss. Remember, intertemporal substitution means that the household are weighing decision across time. So there are several possibilities. We start from the possibility of the substitution between today's consumption versus tomorrow's consumption. Here you can see I highlight time points because it has to be intertemporal. It must be decision that span across time. So if household decrease today's consumption, which means that household will be able to save more money today, then this money in the future would generate more income for household to increase tomorrow's consumption. So evidently, today's consumption and tomorrow's consumption share some kind of trade-off. Whenever household decrease today's consumption, the household will be able to increase tomorrow's consumption. To be more precise, we want to denote P1 as the basket price today and P2 as the basket price tomorrow. So here we relax the assumption that the basket price is the same across time. Therefore, if household decrease buying one basket today, which means that the household will have P1 amount to save. This P1 amount would turn into 1 plus I times P1 tomorrow because there's an interest rate. So this will be the amount that it can grow for tomorrow's expenditure. So with this amount of money, if the household uses to buy consumption basket tomorrow, the household will be able to buy 1 plus I times P1 divided by the basket price P2 tomorrow. And therefore, what we have here is that decreasing one basket consumption today will give the household 1 plus I times P1 divided by P2 more basket tomorrow. If we draw on the seesaw of today's consumption on one end and tomorrow's consumption on the other end, then this number represents the value of one basket unit of today's saving. So which means that if you save one basket a day, you can get this more amount of basket to eat tomorrow. So now we want to think about what tax can change this kind of trade-off. We start from the asset income tax. Suppose government imposes a tax on asset income. Asset income is the income generated by financial asset. So here on the right-hand side, the asset income is interest income. So if the tax rate is tau A, then it means that the asset income for one unit of saving would change from I dollar to 1 minus tau A times I dollar. Therefore, the value of saving would change to what we see now. It would decrease. And the other possible tax policy that can affect the trade-off is consumption tax rate. If government imposes a consumption tax with tax rate tau C, then the basket price after tax would be the original price P1 and P2, but now it has to increase to 1 plus tau C times P1 and 1 plus tau C times P2. So the value of today's saving in terms of tomorrow's consumption would change to what we see now on the right-hand side. Here, because the consumption tax rate for today's basket price and tomorrow's baskets are the same, so actually we can cancel them out. So at the end, this value has nothing to do with consumption tax rate. So in this case, consumption tax rate does not create some substitution effect for intertemporal substitution effect between today and tomorrow's consumption, but asset income tax rate will. So when government increases asset income tax rate, it would decrease the value of saving today. So how household reacts to that would be to save less and consume more today. Okay? Which means that the household would prefer to substitute tomorrow's consumption with today's consumption. If we draw on the graph, it would mean that higher asset income tax rate would decrease today's saving incentive and increase today's consumption demand. Another intertemporal substitution effect we can consider would be the substitution between today's labor and tomorrow's labor. The story works out this way. The household can actually consider increase today's labor so that the household can earn more money to save. When household can earn more money to save, then which means that tomorrow household does not to work so hard in order to earn that equivalent amount of money. So in this case, it would create a trade-off between today's labor and tomorrow's labor, which means household can always decide to work harder today so that he can work less tomorrow. And the exact trade-off value for this story is that we have to first consider the basket price for today and tomorrow to be P1 versus P2. So if the household decide to work one more unit of time, then the household will be able to earn real wage income to be W1 divided by P1. Here for wage rate, I will also assume that wage rate today and tomorrow's could be different. That's why I put down subscript 1. So that with this extra amount of money he earns today, he can save it, and saving it for tomorrow, it would generate an income which will be equivalent to that money times 1 plus I. So interest rate will increase further for the money to use. And with this extra amount of money, if the household decide to work less, remember each one less unit of labor tomorrow will cost the person a loss of W2 divided by P2 real wage rate. Therefore, that amount of money would equivalent to a decrease of tomorrow's labor equal to that amount of money divided by W2 over P2. So what we have here is that there's a trade-off between today's labor and tomorrow's labor. And on the right side of the seesaw, these values represent 1 unit of today's labor, how much it's worth in terms of tomorrow's labor unit. So, which means that if you work 1 more unit of labor today, tomorrow you can decrease your working hour by that much on the right hand side, so that you will still using the same amount of money. So this is the intertemporal benefit of today's hard working. So if you work hard today, tomorrow you can rest this much without affect your wealth. Now we are going to see what would happen if there's some tax rate change, how the intertemporal trade-off would be affected. We first consider consumption tax. The tax rate is tau C. Then we know that it would change the basket price from P1, P2 to P1 times 1 plus tau C and P2 times 1 plus tau C. So the trade-off value would change to what we see now. And if the consumption tax rate is the same across 2 periods, then they will cancel out each other. At the end, it played no role on the trade-off. And then we look at labor income tax. Suppose the tax rate tau L, which will affect the received wage from W1, W2 to W1, W2 times 1 minus tau L. So the trade-off value would change to what we see now. And however, if the tax rate is the same across 2 periods, then they will cancel each other as well. So it plays no role here either. The last, we consider asset income tax, and tax rate is tau A. It would affect the interest rate income from I to 1 minus tau A times I. So it would affect the trade-off value to what we see now. Then we consider higher asset income tax rate. If income tax rate for asset is higher, it would decrease the benefit of working hard today. Therefore, the intertemporal benefit of today's hard working decreases. It would reduce today's labor supply. If we draw on the graph, it means that higher asset income tax rate would create an intertemporal substitution effect to decrease today's labor supply, which would increase real wage rate today and decrease today's employment. And of course, the lower employment would decrease today's marginal productivity of capital, which would decrease the real rental price of capital today. Now we are ready to summarize the effect of tax. First, regarding wealth effect, we learned that if there's no change in government purchase, then we can ignore the wealth effect of tax, which actually is an implication from Ricardian equivalent theory. And then we move on to substitution effect and intertemporal substitution effect. We know that there would be or could be substitution effect or intertemporal substitution effect of tax if our tax system is a proportional tax system, not a lump sum tax system. And we talk about three possible proportional tax. One is the tax on labor income and the tax on consumption. We also talk about tax on asset income. And for previous slides, we focus on substitution effect and intertemporal substitution effect, and we assume a once-for-all tax rate change, which means a permanent tax rate change. And we consider several possible substitutions. One is the substitution between today's consumption and today's labor, which would represent some kind of substitution effect. And we talk about how labor income tax and how consumption tax can affect this substitution effect, can affect the trade-off. And then we move on to the substitution between today's consumption versus tomorrow's consumption. Then the trade-off represents the intertemporal substitution effect. We also discuss about how asset income tax rate can affect such kind of ISE. In addition to that, we also talk about substitution between today's labor and tomorrow's labor. This intertemporal substitution effect can be affected by asset income tax as well. Starting from the trade-off between today's consumption and today's labor, we learned that if government increase labor income tax rate and increase today's consumption tax rate, then it would immediately make households think that working hard will give you less return on purchasing power. Therefore, it will not be a good deal to pursue happiness through consumption, because now to gain consumption, you have to work harder, but now working harder does not give you that much basket to consume. Therefore, you would try to pursue happiness through leisure now instead of working hard to consume, because leisure is a better deal now. At the end, household would choose to work less and consume less. And then we move on to the trade-off between today's consumption and tomorrow's consumption. And when government decides to increase asset income tax rate, it would mean that saving gives you less return on tomorrow's purchasing power. Therefore, it's no longer a good deal to save now for tomorrow. Therefore, household would decide to consume more today and consume less tomorrow. This is the intertemporal substitution effect created by an increase in asset income tax rate. For the last, we move on to the intertemporal substitution between today's labor and tomorrow's labor. And we consider asset income tax rate increase. For such case, it would make the household understand that working hard today to substitute tomorrow's working is getting harder. Therefore, the household would have an incentive to decrease its working for tomorrow incentive. Therefore, the household would decide to work less today and more tomorrow. These are all the effects that we learned so far. However, students have to bear in mind there actually are more different kinds of intertemporal substitution effect that we will discuss in the classroom.